I was 24 when I decided to take my very first solo trip outside North America. Like so many young travelers chasing adventure, I chose Thailand for all the obvious reasons. Every travel blog painted it as paradise. Friends who had already been there couldn't stop talking about the crystal clear beaches, the warm-hearted locals, the incredible street food, and how affordable everything was. It looked like the perfect place to prove to myself that I could explore the world alone. For the first week, they were right. I wandered through the crowded streets of Bangkok, drifted between colorful night markets, explored hidden temples, and later made my way south toward the coast. Every destination felt more beautiful than the last. The beaches looked almost unreal beneath the afternoon sun. Strangers smiled without expecting anything in return, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely free. At no point did I feel threatened. Not even once. That illusion lasted exactly 7 days. The second half of my trip brought me to a small hotel several miles outside Krabi. Calling it a hotel almost felt generous. It was more like a collection of 20 modest rooms scattered across several low concrete buildings. The property sat in eerie isolation, embraced by thick jungle on 3 sides, while the Andaman Sea stretched endlessly beyond the 4th. After sunset, there were no nearby restaurants, no busy roads, no crowds of tourists. Only insects humming in the darkness, waves crashing somewhere beyond the trees, and long empty roads disappearing into blackness. That isolation was exactly why I had booked it. I wanted silence. Looking back now, silence was the worst possible thing I could have chosen. On my second afternoon, I rented a small scooter and spent hours wandering along the coastal roads without any destination. I stopped whenever I saw a viewpoint or a quiet beach. Time slipped away unnoticed until the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and purple. As darkness settled in, I found a tiny roadside restaurant roughly 20 minutes from the hotel. It looked family-owned. A few plastic tables sat beneath hanging lights that attracted clouds of insects. There were only 3 other customers eating quietly while an old television played in the background. I ordered seafood, drank a couple of beers, chatted briefly with the owner despite our language barrier, and eventually climbed back onto the scooter. By then, night had completely swallowed the coastline. The road home was nearly empty. No streetlights, no houses, no traffic. Only the narrow ribbon of pavement cutting through miles of jungle. About halfway back, I noticed another scooter behind me. At first, I ignored it. It was a public road. Someone else heading the same direction wasn't unusual. But after several minutes, something started bothering me. Whenever I eased off the throttle, the other scooter slowed down. Whenever I accelerated, it accelerated too. The distance between us never changed. Not closer, not farther. Always exactly the same. I tried convincing myself I was imagining things. Maybe we were simply driving at the same speed. Maybe my mind was inventing patterns because I was alone in unfamiliar territory. Still, the feeling growing in my stomach refused to disappear. Eventually, I pulled onto the shoulder and pretended to check my phone. The scooter finally passed. Relief washed over me. I even laughed quietly at myself. You're paranoid, I thought. Then my headlights revealed something that instantly erased that relief. Roughly 50 yards ahead, the scooter had stopped. It wasn't parked beside a shop. There wasn't a gas station. No house. No intersection. Nothing. The rider had simply pulled off the road and was sitting perfectly still beside the jungle, waiting. I couldn't see his face beneath the darkness. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't making a phone call. He wasn't fixing the bike. He was just sitting there, motionless, as if he knew exactly where I was. Every instinct inside me screamed that something wasn't right. I stayed frozen for nearly half a minute, pretending to scroll through my phone while my heart pounded so violently I could hear it inside my helmet. Then I did the only thing that felt remotely safe. I turned the scooter around and sped back the way I had come. I didn't stop until I reached a brightly lit gas station where several locals were standing outside talking. Only then did I finally breathe again. I waited there for almost 15 minutes, convincing myself that if someone had truly been following me, they would have appeared by now. They never did. Gradually, embarrassment replaced fear. Maybe exhaustion had gotten to me. Maybe the beers had made me overly suspicious. Maybe traveling alone had made me see danger where none existed. Eventually, I laughed at my own imagination and headed back toward the hotel. The rest of the night passed quietly. Nothing happened. No one knocked on my door. No strange noises came from outside. By morning, I had almost convinced myself the entire incident had been nothing more than an overactive imagination. I spent most of the next day relaxing on the beach not far from the hotel. The sun was bright. Families played in the water. Couples took pictures near the shoreline. Everything looked completely normal. Then, I noticed him. He was sitting alone near the tree line where the dense jungle began. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't swimming. He wasn't reading. He wasn't using his phone. He wasn't even watching the ocean. He seemed to be watching people. At first I couldn't understand why he caught my attention. Then it hit me. The dark jacket. Exactly the same one the scooter rider had been wearing the previous night. My pulse instantly quickened. I still couldn't identify his face. The helmet had hidden it before, and now he sat too far away. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe hundreds of people owned identical jackets. Maybe I was connecting things that weren't connected at all. But fear doesn't always need proof. Sometimes it only needs possibility. I gathered my belongings and left immediately. As I walked back toward the hotel, I resisted every urge to look behind me. Finally, curiosity won. I glanced over my shoulder. The man had stood up. He was walking too. Not directly behind me. Not close enough to alarm anyone. Just far enough away that if someone happened to notice, it would look like two strangers heading in the same direction. Yet every time I looked back, he was still there. Never rushing. Never slowing. Simply matching my pace. By the time I reached my room, my hands were shaking hard enough that I struggled to unlock the door. I stayed inside for the rest of the afternoon, with every curtain closed. Every sound outside made me stop breathing. Every footstep along the walkway made me freeze. Every shadow crossing the window forced my eyes toward the glass. As evening approached, I finally decided to tell the young man working the front desk everything that had happened. He listened patiently without interrupting. When I finished, he smiled politely, almost sympathetically. Then he shrugged. He told me that many tourists became anxious after traveling alone for several days. The unfamiliar environment, the isolation, and the darkness often cause people to misinterpret ordinary situations. If anything actually happens, he said calmly, just call us. That was it. No concern. No questions. No offer to check the security cameras. No suggestion that anyone had been seen near my room. Walking back upstairs, I felt foolish. Maybe he was right. Maybe loneliness had allowed my imagination to spiral out of control. Maybe I had turned two meaningless encounters into a terrifying story inside my own head. But deep down, there was one thought I couldn't silence. If it really had all been coincidence, why couldn't I shake the feeling that someone already knew exactly which room I was sleeping in? By the time I returned to my room that evening, I had almost talked myself out of my own fear. The hotel clerk's calm reaction had done exactly what it was supposed to do. He hadn't laughed at me. He hadn't called me paranoid. He had simply explained that people traveling alone often became hyper-aware of everything around them. Strange places, unfamiliar sounds, endless hours without anyone to talk to, our minds naturally begin connecting random events into frightening patterns. It sounded perfectly reasonable. A man on a scooter, a stranger sitting on a beach, someone walking in the same direction. Individually, none of those things meant anything. Looking back now, I wish they hadn't. I showered, checked my phone for a while, and eventually climbed into bed. Outside, the jungle had already swallowed the last traces of daylight. Unlike cities where nighttime still carries distant traffic and human voices, this place became unnaturally silent after dark. No cars. No music. No conversations. Only waves crashing somewhere beyond the trees and the constant chorus of insects echoing through the darkness. Eventually, exhaustion won. I fell asleep, convincing myself that tomorrow I would laugh about the entire experience. Then something woke me. I opened my eyes into complete darkness. For several seconds, I couldn't remember where I was. The digital clock beside the bed read 2:03 a.m. I needed to use the bathroom. Still half asleep, I pushed myself upright. That was when I heard it. A soft scraping sound. Barely audible. At first, I assumed it was an animal moving through the bushes outside. The hotel was surrounded by jungle. There were probably monkeys, stray cats, or any number of creatures wandering around at night. I lay there, listening. Silence. Then, footsteps. Not leaves rustling, not branches snapping. Actual footsteps. Slow measured. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Someone was walking directly outside my room. Every muscle in my body locked. My room sat on the ground floor, only a few feet from the narrow walkway connecting the buildings. Anyone passing by would be close enough to touch the windows. The footsteps continued, each one slower than the last. Then they stopped, directly outside my window. I didn't breathe. The room suddenly felt impossibly small. I stared into the darkness, trying to convince myself I was imagining everything. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. Nothing. Just as I started relaxing, I heard the faint metallic click of my door handle. Someone was turning it. Not violently. Not like they were trying to break in. Just slowly. Carefully. As though they wanted to see whether I had remembered to lock it. The handle rotated almost all the way before gently returning to its original position. Silence returned. My heartbeat thundered so loudly I was certain whoever stood outside could hear it through the walls. I reached for my phone with trembling hands. Before I could unlock the screen, the handle moved again. This time the pressure lasted longer. The person outside wasn't testing the door anymore. They were trying to open it. Every instinct screamed at me not to make a sound. I dialed the front desk anyway. The call rang. Once, twice, 5 times. No answer. Only then did I remember what the clerk had casually mentioned earlier. The reception office closed overnight. There was no night manager, no security guard, no overnight staff, no one watching the property, no one coming if I screamed. The realization hit me harder than the sound outside ever could. I wasn't just frightened. I was completely alone. Several more seconds crawled by. Finally, the footsteps retreated, slowly. One step, then another, moving away from the door. Relief washed over me so suddenly I almost laughed. Maybe another guest had gotten drunk. Maybe they had mistaken my room for theirs. It happened in hotels all the time. That explanation sounded comforting enough. Too comforting. Because something inside me still refused to settle down. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing. Sometimes it overpowers survival instinct. I don't know why I did it. Even now, years later, I still can't explain it. Very carefully, I slipped out of bed. I crossed the room without making a sound. Every floorboard seemed impossibly loud beneath my feet. My fingers found the curtain. I pulled back only the tiniest corner, barely enough to see outside. What I saw froze every thought inside my head. A man was crouching directly beneath my window, not standing, not walking past, crouching, his face tilted upward, his eyes fixed on my room, as though he had been waiting, watching, listening. The moonlight illuminated only part of his face, but it was enough. It was him. The same dark jacket, the same build, the same man I had seen beside the road, the same man sitting near the tree line at the beach. For one endless second, neither of us moved. Then his eyes shifted. He saw the curtain move. He knew I was looking at him. His expression didn't change. No surprise. No panic. Only recognition. Then, without making a single sound, he stood and sprinted into the darkness. Not toward the road. Toward the jungle. Within seconds, he disappeared completely, as though the forest had swallowed him. Adrenaline exploded through my body. I slammed the curtain shut, locked the bathroom door from the inside, and curled into the corner, clutching my phone. Every tiny noise outside made me jump. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps returning. Every creak in the building convinced me it found another way inside. I didn't sleep again. I simply waited. Minute after minute, hour after hour, watching the bathroom door while dawn slowly painted pale light beneath it. When the first birds began singing, I almost cried with relief. Around 7 o'clock, I heard voices outside. The hotel owner had arrived. I rushed out before he even reached the reception desk and told him everything that had happened during the night. Unlike everyone else, he didn't dismiss me. The moment I described the man, his expression changed completely. The color drained from his face. Without saying another word, he reached into his pocket, unlocked his phone, and opened a photograph. "Is this him?" he asked quietly. My stomach dropped. It was the same face, the same eyes, the same man. There wasn't the slightest doubt anymore. The owner sighed heavily before explaining that the man had become well known among local businesses over the previous year. Hotels, convenience stores, restaurants, even scooter rental shops. Everyone had reported seeing him. His behavior was always disturbingly similar. He would select tourists traveling alone, follow them for hours, sometimes days, always keeping just enough distance to make people question themselves. He never threatened anyone directly, never spoke, never approached in daylight, and every single time police were called, he vanished, as though he knew exactly how long he could stay before disappearing. No one ever discovered what he truly wanted. That uncertainty was somehow more terrifying than any explanation. If he had been a robber, at least there would have been a motive. If he had been mentally ill, there would have been a pattern. Instead, there was only silence. I packed everything in less than 10 minutes. I didn't even bother eating breakfast. The owner personally arranged transportation to a larger hotel closer to the center of town, insisting I should stay somewhere with security and plenty of people around. For the first time in nearly 2 days, I finally believed the nightmare was over. The drive took us along the coast before merging onto a busier highway. Traffic increased. More people appeared. Shops lined the roadside. With every mile, my breathing became easier. About 2 hours into the journey, we stopped at a convenience store so I could buy water. It felt wonderfully ordinary. Families browsed snacks. Children laughed near the entrance. A delivery truck unloaded boxes beside the building. For the first time since leaving the hotel, I felt safe. I grabbed a bottle of water and walked to the register. As the cashier counted my change, something made me glance through the large front window. Across the road, beneath the shadow of a broad tree, a single scooter stood parked. The engine wasn't running. The rider hadn't removed his helmet. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't shopping. He was simply sitting perfectly still, watching the entrance, watching everyone who walked in, watching me, and even from that distance, I recognized the dark jacket immediately. The instant our eyes met through the convenience store window, something changed. The rider remained perfectly still for only a heartbeat. Then, without any sign of panic, he calmly started the scooter's engine. The low rumble drifted across the road. He never waved, never threatened me, never even looked hurried. He simply pulled away from the curb, disappeared into traffic, and vanished as if he had never existed. That was the last time I ever saw him. At least, the last time I know I saw him. To this day, I still have no idea what he wanted. Maybe he planned to rob me. Maybe he intended to break into my room while I slept. Maybe kidnapping had crossed his mind. Or maybe his intentions were something far darker, something I was fortunate enough never to discover. What continues to haunt me isn't the thought of what he might have done. It's what he actually did. He watched. He waited. He appeared wherever I happened to be, never close enough to force a confrontation, yet never far enough to let me forget he existed. He somehow located my isolated hotel. He stood outside my room in the middle of the night. He crouched beneath my window, silently staring upward while I slept only a few feet away. And every single time I changed locations, somehow, he already knew where I was. Over the years, I've traveled across dozens of countries. I've wandered through crowded cities after midnight, crossed unfamiliar neighborhoods alone, gotten lost in remote mountain villages, and experienced situations that would make most people uncomfortable. Nothing, not one of those experiences, has ever matched the cold terror of pulling back that curtain at 2 o'clock in the morning and finding a stranger already waiting beneath my window. That memory never truly faded. It simply buried itself somewhere deep enough that I stopped thinking about it, until another trip reminded me how quickly ordinary adventures can become nightmares. This happened years earlier. I was only 17. Our high school organized a 5-day educational trip to Brussels, Belgium. For most of us, it was the first time exploring another European capital without our parents. The teachers had carefully planned every hour. Museums, historical landmarks, government buildings, walking tours, group dinners. Everything followed a strict schedule. To be fair, many of the activities were genuinely enjoyable. My classmates laughed constantly. We took hundreds of photos. The atmosphere was relaxed and everyone seemed determined to make the most of the trip. But there was one problem. I've never been good at following schedules. Even then, I always believed the best memories happened outside carefully planned itineraries. The excitement came from stepping away from the group, doing something unexpected, taking a small risk simply because nobody expected you to. That attitude almost became the biggest mistake of my life. The days disappeared surprisingly fast. Before I realized it, the 4th evening had arrived. Everyone planned to sleep early because our bus back to Denmark would leave before sunrise. We needed to wake up around 5 in the morning for the long journey home. By 10 o'clock, the hotel had become unusually quiet. One by one, the lights in the room switched off. Conversations faded. Doors closed. Within an hour, the entire building fell asleep, except for me. I wasn't tired. The thought of spending my final night in Brussels staring at a hotel ceiling felt unbearable. I asked several friends if anyone wanted to sneak out for a walk through the city. Every one of them refused. Some were already asleep before I finished asking. Others simply laughed and rolled over in bed. Eventually, I gave up. Our room housed 4 boys from school. While the others slept peacefully, I stepped into the hallway carrying only my phone. Sitting outside the room, I absent-mindedly opened Tinder. At first, it was only a way to kill time. Then something unexpected happened. A girl I'd been chatting with earlier replied almost immediately. Our conversation moved quickly. Within half an hour, we had agreed to meet. She sent me an address several kilometers away from the hotel. Looking back now, that should have been the moment I closed the app and went to bed. Instead, I smiled. The idea felt exciting, forbidden, like the kind of story I'd someday tell my friends. I quietly grabbed the room key, slipped downstairs without alerting any teachers, and stepped outside into the cool Belgian night. Adrenaline rushed through me. Everything suddenly felt like an adventure. The city looked completely different after dark. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. Old buildings cast long shadows across narrow streets. Music drifted from distant bars. Groups of strangers laughed somewhere beyond my line of sight. Following the GPS, I wandered farther and farther from the tourist district. For the first time in my life, older men standing outside pubs shouted comments as I walked past. Some whistled. Others laughed loudly in languages I couldn't understand. I kept pretending not to notice, but every voice made me glance over my shoulder. Was someone following me? Was I walking into the wrong neighborhood? Or was I simply letting my imagination take over? Eventually, I reached the address. Only then did I realize how different this part of Brussels was from everything we'd visited during the day. The streets felt strangely empty. Many storefronts glowed beneath harsh neon lights. Several enormous windows displayed people standing inside under bright-colored lamps. Some tapped slowly against the glass with impossibly long fingernails. Others smiled silently at anyone passing. The makeup, the wigs, the dramatic clothing, everything felt surreal to a 17-year-old who had never witnessed anything remotely similar. A few men wandered quietly through the streets. Nobody seemed surprised by anything. Everyone minded their own business. Even though fear crawled beneath my skin, curiosity kept pulling me forward. The meeting with the girl itself was completely ordinary. She was friendly. We talked. We laughed. Nothing suspicious happened. For a while, I forgot how nervous I'd been getting there. Eventually, sometime after midnight, I decided to head back to the hotel. That was when everything began falling apart. The September air had become bitterly cold. Dark clouds rolled overhead. Rain began falling in slow, icy drops. Instead of retracing the familiar route, my GPS suggested a shorter path. Without thinking, I accepted it. Within minutes, I realized I no longer recognized anything around me. The lively streets had disappeared. No cafes. No tourists. No music. Only narrow roads disappearing between old apartment blocks stained by decades of weather. The farther I walked, the fewer people I saw. Those I did pass were almost entirely men. Most stood together in small groups near alleyways. Some smoked silently. Others watched passing strangers without saying a word. Nobody smiled. Nobody looked approachable. Every instinct told me I shouldn't be there. I pulled my jacket tighter as rain soaked through the fabric. The cold bit into my hands. I reached for my phone to check the map one more time. The screen flickered, then went black. At first I assumed it had frozen. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Again. Nothing. My stomach tightened.
No response.
No charging symbol. No vibration. The battery had died. Complete darkness. Complete silence. Complete isolation. Panic crashed into me all at once. I slapped the phone against my palm, pressed every button repeatedly, shouted in frustration. When that didn't work, I actually hit it against my leg, hoping somehow it would spring back to life. Nothing. Only the sound of rain. I slowly turned in a full circle. Every street looked identical. Every building blended into the darkness. There wasn't a single landmark I recognized. No glowing hotel sign. No familiar square. No idea which direction home even was. For the first time that night, the adventure no longer felt exciting. It felt dangerously real. I understood something immediately. If I allowed panic to take control, I would make even worse decisions. So I forced myself to breathe. The first person I saw walking alone was an older man carrying a grocery bag beneath a worn umbrella. Without hesitating, I hurried toward him. He looked startled as I approached. I must have appeared exhausted, soaked by rain, shivering from the cold, and far younger than I actually believed myself to be. For a long second, he simply stared at me. Then, perhaps seeing genuine fear on my face, his expression softened. He lowered his umbrella slightly and quietly asked if I needed help. The man didn't hesitate when I asked for help. After listening patiently as I stumbled through my explanation, telling him I was a 17-year-old student from Denmark, separated from my group with a dead phone and absolutely no sense of direction, he nodded sympathetically. I expected him to point toward the city center, maybe draw an invisible map with his hands, perhaps recommend a street I should follow. Instead, he simply smiled and said, "Come with me." There was something incredibly reassuring about him. He looked to be around my father's age, dressed plainly, carrying nothing except a worn umbrella that barely protected either of us from the increasingly heavy rain. I can't remember the details of his face anymore. Time has erased almost everything about him except one thing. He made me feel safe, or at least safe enough to keep walking. Even then, I never completely lowered my guard. Every few seconds, I instinctively checked that my room key was still in my pocket. My dead phone remained there too. My wallet. Everything was exactly where it should be. We walked through the rain for what felt like forever. Neither of us talked very much. Water poured down the empty streets, turning the sidewalks into shining mirrors beneath the orange streetlights. Our footsteps echoed through neighborhoods that had become almost completely deserted. Occasionally, I glanced sideways at him. A strange thought kept repeating itself. I had been terrified of everyone I passed only minutes earlier. Now I was voluntarily following a complete stranger through the middle of the night. Fear has a strange way of changing your definition of trust. Eventually, familiar buildings began appearing. Then I saw the hotel. Relief flooded through my body so intensely that my knees almost felt weak. I thanked him several times. He simply nodded, wished me good luck, and disappeared back into the rain before I even reached the entrance. To this day, I still wish I had at least learned his name. Without him, I honestly don't know how long I would have wandered those streets. Standing in front of the hotel, I remember feeling almost invincible again. The building suddenly represented safety. Solid walls, locked doors, sleeping classmates, teachers only a few rooms away. Whatever anxiety I had carried through the city dissolved the moment I stepped inside. The entrance door locked automatically behind me with a heavy mechanical click. I actually smiled when I heard it. That sound meant nobody else could simply wander in, or so I believed. The corridors were silent. Most lights had already been dimmed for the night. I quietly unlocked our room, careful not to wake the 3 classmates sleeping inside. Their steady breathing filled the darkness. It was comforting.
Normal.
I took a quick shower to wash away the rain and the exhaustion clinging to my body. Within minutes, I crawled into the bottom bunk, pulled the blanket over myself, and fell asleep almost instantly. I don't know how much time passed before something pulled me awake. At first, I thought I was dreaming. A bright white light burned against my eyelids. My first instinct was to roll over. Then I realized the light was moving. I slowly opened my eyes. A flashlight was shining directly into my face. For a split second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. There was a face, only inches away from mine. A man I had never seen before was leaning over my bed. His eyes stared directly into mine. His breathing was close enough that I could hear it. My entire body froze. People often imagine that terror makes you scream. Sometimes it does exactly the opposite. Not a single sound came out. It felt as though my body had forgotten how to function. Then survival instinct exploded through me. I jerked backward as violently as the bunk bed allowed, slamming my shoulder into the wall behind me. My heart hammered so hard it almost hurt. "What are you doing?" I asked in English, my voice cracking. "Who are you?" Oddly enough, the man didn't look surprised. He didn't panic. He didn't try to run. Instead, he answered with unsettling calmness. "I came from the lobby," he said. "I'm helping your friend Samuel." The sentence sounded so ordinary that it briefly interrupted my fear. Samuel. I did know someone named Samuel. He was another student on the trip. The kind of guy who constantly misplaced things. If anyone were capable of losing something important in the middle of the night, it would be him. Still confused and barely awake, I reached instinctively toward the side of my bed. My watch was still there. My phone. My wallet. Everything appeared untouched. The digital display on my watch read 4:02 a.m. Something still felt terribly wrong. If Samuel needed help, why was this stranger standing over my bed? Why wasn't Samuel here himself? The man stepped away from me and calmly walked toward our wardrobe. Without asking permission, he opened it. Then he started searching through our belongings. Slowly, methodically, almost professionally. I rubbed my eyes, still trying to wake up completely. "What exactly did Samuel lose?" I asked. Without looking at me, he answered immediately. "His visa. He can't find it." The explanation sounded strangely believable. A passport. A visa. Those were exactly the kinds of things that could ruin an international school trip. Before I could think further, another student entered our room. He spoke with the stranger as though everything happening was completely normal. They continued searching together, opening drawers, looking beneath bags, checking shelves. The stranger behaved with complete confidence. He moved like someone who belonged there, like someone who had every right to search through the private belongings of sleeping teenagers. That confidence was probably his greatest weapon. Nobody questioned him because he never acted like an intruder. He acted like someone solving a problem. My roommate slowly woke up. Still half asleep, he asked me what was happening. I shrugged. "I think Samuel lost his visa." Even saying the words aloud, they sounded strange. I couldn't explain why. Nothing about the situation actually made sense. Why search our room? Samuel hadn't even slept here. Why would hotel staff enter guest rooms before dawn? Why wasn't a teacher present? Question after question drifted through my exhausted mind. But fatigue is powerful. It dulls judgment. It convinces you that impossible things are perfectly reasonable. I kept watching the stranger. His flashlight swept calmly across backpacks, jackets, drawers, and luggage. Every movement looked practiced, careful, deliberate. The last image I remember before drifting back to sleep was strangely ordinary. The man kneeling beside the bunk across from mine, quietly unzipping another student's backpack. Morning arrived with noise. Students hurried through the corridors. Teachers knocked on doors. Everyone rushed to prepare for the long bus ride back to Denmark. Then confusion spread. One room reported missing belongings. Then another. Then another. Soon the entire floor buzzed with nervous conversations. 3 students had lost valuable possessions during the night. A visa, a laptop, cash personal documents, other belongings that had been inside backpacks only hours earlier. The losses weren't random. Whoever had taken them knew exactly what carried value. Only then did the horrifying realization begin spreading through everyone. No one from the hotel had entered our rooms. No employee had been searching for a missing visa. There had been no emergency, no request from reception, nothing. The man had lied to every single room he entered. Police later believed he had probably stolen Samuel's visa first. After reading the name inside the document, he created the perfect story. Whenever sleepy students questioned him, he calmly replied the same way. Samuel lost his visa. The explanation sounded so specific, so believable, that nobody stopped him. One by one, half-awake teenagers unknowingly invited a thief to search through their own belongings. Even now, what unsettles me most isn't what he stole. It's how effortlessly he manipulated exhausted minds. He didn't need weapons. He didn't force doors. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply understood one terrifying truth about human nature. If you sound confident enough, people will often ignore the voice inside them whispering that something is terribly, terribly wrong. In the days that followed, the more I replayed that night in my mind, the more I understood how terrifyingly simple his plan had been. He hadn't needed violence. He hadn't needed to force a single lock. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he relied on something far more powerful: exhaustion, trust.
Confusion are leavened docked God.
We were nothing more than a group of 17-year-old students in a foreign country, exhausted after days of traveling, too sleepy to question what was happening around us. Our minds accepted the first explanation that sounded reasonable, and he knew it. That was all he needed. Looking back now, I realized the flashlight wasn't just a source of light. It was a weapon. Shining it directly into someone's eyes at 4 o'clock in the morning instantly steals away their ability to think clearly. You wake up blinded, disoriented, and desperate to understand where you are. Before your mind catches up, the stranger already controls the conversation. He had perfected the illusion. He spoke calmly. He moved confidently. He acted as though he belonged there. And because he behaved like someone with authority, none of us questioned whether he actually had any. Only later did I understand just how close I had come to losing everything. When I woke up that morning, my phone and my watch were still lying beside my pillow, exactly where I had left them before falling asleep. But now the image of that stranger leaning over my bed refused to leave my mind. He hadn't been checking whether I was awake. He hadn't been looking for Samuel's visa. He had been staring directly at the valuables lying inches from my face. If I hadn't opened my eyes at that exact moment, would they still have been there? I don't think so. That thought has haunted me for years. The hotel itself offered very few answers. As far as I know, there were no surveillance cameras inside the boys' building, no footage, no recordings, no evidence showing how the stranger entered, no proof revealing how many rooms he visited. It was as though he had appeared from nowhere, walked through sleeping teenagers, then vanished into the darkness before sunrise. The police arrived surprisingly quickly once the thefts were discovered. Instead of loading our luggage onto the bus, we spent the early morning watching officers move from room to room, taking statements and documenting everything that had gone missing. The atmosphere had changed completely. Only hours earlier, everyone had been excited about returning home with stories from an unforgettable school trip. Now conversations were replaced by nervous whispers. Students repeatedly checked their bags. Teachers counted passports again and again. Nobody trusted the locked doors anymore. Our departure was delayed for several hours while Samuel and the other victims answered questions from investigators. Fortunately, emergency travel documents were eventually arranged after we returned to Denmark, allowing everyone to move on with their lives, at least on paper. The investigation, however, slowly disappeared. Weeks passed, then months. No updates, no arrests, no phone calls, no explanation. The stranger simply became another unsolved memory. A faceless intruder who walked into a secured building, convinced sleeping teenagers that he belonged there, stole what he wanted and disappeared before daylight. Most people eventually stop talking about it. I never really did, because one question has remained with me ever since. What if it was my fault? The thought surfaces every now and then, usually late at night when memories have a habit of returning uninvited. What if someone had quietly followed me back from the city without me noticing? I had spent nearly an hour walking through unfamiliar streets, distracted by rain, fatigue, and a dead phone. How would I have known if another pair of footsteps had stayed just beyond my hearing? Or perhaps, in my rush to get inside the building, soaked to the bone and desperate to sleep, did I fail to let the main entrance close completely? Those automatic locks depended on the heavy front door shutting all the way. Did I accidentally leave enough space for someone to slip inside behind me? I honestly don't know. I was probably the last student to return that night. If anyone entered after me, it almost certainly happened because there was no one else left awake. That uncertainty has never disappeared. Then another thought began troubling me, one that is somehow even harder to ignore. Out of every sleeping student in that room, why did he come directly to me first? My phone and watch were lying beside my pillow. That explanation makes perfect sense. Yet sometimes, when I remember the flashlight shining directly into my eyes, I wonder whether there was another reason. Perhaps he recognized me. Perhaps I wasn't simply another random student. Perhaps I was the boy who had unknowingly led him to the building. I'll never know. And sometimes, not knowing is far more frightening than learning the truth. A few years later, I found myself on another journey, convinced that frightening travel stories belonged in the past. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was late summer, 2019. 4 close friends and I planned what we expected would be one of the most unforgettable road trips of our lives. Our destination was the breathtaking Lofoten Islands, deep inside the Arctic Circle in northern Norway. The region is famous for dramatic mountain peaks rising straight from icy fjords, tiny fishing villages balanced on rocky coastlines, endless hiking trails, and landscapes so beautiful they almost feel unreal. Photographs hardly do the place justice. Everywhere you look, towering cliffs disappear into crystal clear water beneath skies that seem impossibly wide. It's the kind of destination people dream about for years. To reach it, however, requires patience. We flew into the nearest major city where we had arranged to rent a car. From there, civilization seemed to fade with every passing mile. Northern Norway is breathtaking, partly because almost nobody lives there. Large towns are separated by vast stretches of wilderness. Gas stations become rare. Mobile signal fades in and out. Roads weave endlessly between mountains, forests, and open coastline with little evidence that another human being is anywhere nearby. According to our GPS, the drive to our rented apartment in a tiny fishing village would take almost 7 hours. After flights, airport delays, collecting luggage, and waiting for the rental vehicle, all of us were already exhausted before the journey had even begun. Still, none of us wanted to waste another night. We just wanted to reach the cabin as quickly as possible. There was only one problem. I was the only person insured to drive. That meant every mile, every winding road, every decision rested entirely on my shoulders. Norway is famous for enforcing speed limits with remarkable strictness. The roads may appear empty, but hidden cameras and police patrols are common, and fines can be severe. I understood that before we even started the engine. Even so, after hours behind the wheel, surrounded by endless wilderness with hardly another vehicle in sight, resisting the temptation to drive just a little faster became increasingly difficult. The road stretched endlessly ahead, disappearing into silent valleys where the daylight lingered far longer than we were used to. At the time, I believed the greatest danger on that drive would be accidentally speeding. I had no idea that somewhere far ahead, waiting beyond those empty Arctic roads, something far more unsettling was about to enter our journey. For long stretches of the journey, it felt as though we were the only people left in the world. The road stretched endlessly ahead, disappearing into the Arctic darkness like a ribbon of black glass. Towering mountains stood silently on either side, their jagged outlines barely visible beneath the pale glow of the northern sky. Every few minutes we would pass a lonely farmhouse or a weather-beaten cabin, but most of the time there was nothing. No towns, no gas stations, no lights in distant windows, no other cars. Only the sound of our engine echoing through an endless wilderness. The isolation was breathtaking during the day. At night, it became something entirely different. It was approaching midnight when we finally passed through the largest town anywhere near our destination. According to the GPS, we had less than 40 minutes left before reaching the small fishing village where our apartment waited. Everyone in the car visibly relaxed. After nearly 7 hours on the road, the hardest part of the drive was finally behind us. People began talking again. Someone started discussing what we would cook once we arrived. Another friend was already planning the first hiking route for the following morning. For For the first time all evening, the atmosphere felt light again. I remember thinking that nothing could possibly happen now. We were almost there. That thought didn't survive another minute. Most of the highway until then had consisted of a single, narrow lane in each direction, making overtaking almost impossible. As we left the town behind, however, the road widened. An additional lane appeared clearly designed for passing slower vehicles before the highway narrowed again. Ahead of us was a dark-colored Volkswagen Golf traveling well below the speed limit. I checked my mirrors. The opposite lane was completely empty. No headlights. No approaching traffic. Nothing. I accelerated smoothly, past the Golf without exceeding the speed limit signaled, and merged back into my lane. It was one of the most ordinary driving maneuvers imaginable. Nobody in the car even commented on it. We continued talking as though nothing had happened. Then Jesse quietly said, is that guy getting closer?" I glanced into the rearview mirror. The Golf was suddenly much nearer than before, far nearer than seemed necessary. Within seconds, the distance between our cars had almost disappeared. His headlights filled the entire rear window. I could no longer see the front bumper of his vehicle. Only two blinding beams of light pressing against us from behind. "Maybe he's just in a hurry," someone suggested. I nodded, trying not to overreact. If he wanted to pass, he eventually would. Instead, he slowed down, then accelerated again. Closer, farther, closer again. Over and over. The pattern continued for several minutes. Each time I thought he would finally overtake us, he fell back slightly. Each time I relaxed, he surged forward until his headlights flooded the interior of our car. No one laughed anymore. The conversation stopped one by one. Eventually, the only sound inside the vehicle was the steady hum of the tires against wet asphalt. Then the darkness behind us suddenly became daylight. A brilliant white explosion flooded every mirror. The driver had switched on an enormous auxiliary floodlight mounted across the roof of his car. The beam was unbelievably powerful. It poured through every window, bounced off every mirror, and reflected directly into my eyes. The inside of our vehicle turned ghostly white. For several terrifying seconds, I struggled to see the road ahead. The glare erased depth perception. The mountains vanished. The lane markings blurred together. It felt almost impossible to judge distance. I instinctively lowered my rearview mirror. It barely helped. The light still spilled through the side mirrors and rear windows like a searchlight hunting prey. Someone in the back seat muttered, "What the hell is this guy doing?" Nobody had an answer. Earlier in the trip, we had learned that drivers in northern Norway often install extremely powerful auxiliary lights because winter darkness can last almost around the clock. Out there, such equipment made perfect sense. But this wasn't winter, and there wasn't another car for miles. He wasn't trying to see the road. He was making sure we couldn't. I replayed the overtake in my mind again and again. Had I cut him off? No. Had I forced him to brake? Not even slightly. Had I exceeded the speed limit? Definitely not. Everything about the maneuver had been safe, careful, routine. Yet somehow, this stranger had decided we deserved his attention. I forced myself to remain calm. The worst thing I could do was respond emotionally. I kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel and maintained exactly the posted speed limit. Surely, I thought, once he realized I wasn't interested in racing or provoking him, he would lose interest. Instead, he remained there, always the same distance behind us, always watching. Eventually, I leaned slightly toward Jesse without taking my eyes off the road. "If this guy follows us all the way to the village..." I paused. Neither of us finished the sentence. We didn't need to. Everyone in the car understood exactly what I meant. Minutes passed. Eventually, I increased our speed slightly, not beyond the limit, just enough to create a comfortable gap. Surprisingly, he didn't accelerate. He allowed the distance to grow. For the first time in nearly 15 minutes, we began convincing ourselves we had imagined the whole thing. Maybe he had simply been impatient. Maybe the floodlight had been switched on absent-mindedly. Maybe everything had been an unfortunate misunderstanding. Hope has a remarkable ability to appear just before reality destroys it. The road curved toward the entrance of the fishing village. Ahead stood a narrow one-lane bridge controlled by traffic lights. One direction crossed at a time. The light facing us turned red. With nowhere else to go, I stopped. Silence filled the car. No one reached for a phone. No one spoke. Every pair of eyes drifted toward the mirrors. Several long seconds passed. Nothing. Then around the bend behind us, headlights appeared. The Golf. He rolled slowly toward the queue and stopped directly behind us. Not another vehicle. Not a truck. Not a local resident. Only him. The floodlight remained off now. He didn't honk. Didn't flash his headlights. Didn't attempt to overtake. He simply waited, watching. The traffic signal finally turned green. I crossed the narrow bridge with an uneasy feeling settling deeper into my chest. Beyond the bridge lay our destination, our apartment, our luggage, our entire holiday. Then, an unsettling realization struck me with surprising force. If I drove directly there, he would know exactly where we were staying. In a place this isolated, surrounded by mountains, sea, and only a handful of houses, there would be nowhere else to disappear. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Without saying anything at first, I made a decision. Whatever happened next, I wasn't going to lead that car to our front door. I made my decision in less than a second. There was no way I was driving directly to our apartment. If the man in the Golf had been following us intentionally, leading him straight to the place where we planned to spend the next several nights would have been the worst mistake imaginable. So instead of following the GPS, I turned sharply at the next intersection. No explanation, no warning, just instinct. "What are you doing?" someone asked from the back seat. "I'm checking something." Nobody needed me to explain what that meant. The atmosphere inside the car had already changed completely. A few minutes earlier, we had been joking about dinner and tomorrow's hiking plans. Now, every conversation had vanished. The only sounds were the windshield wipers pushing rain across the glass and the low growl of our engine echoing through the empty village. The fishing village looked almost abandoned. Tiny wooden houses stood scattered along the shoreline, their windows dark. Fishing boats rocked silently in the harbor. Streetlights were few and far between, leaving long stretches of road swallowed by shadow. It was well after 1 o'clock in the morning. Most of the residents had been asleep for hours. There wasn't a single pedestrian anywhere. No open cafes, no passing traffic, no witnesses. I deliberately ignored the GPS and began weaving through random streets. Left, right, another right, a narrow lane, back toward the harbor, then another turn into a residential area. The route made absolutely no sense. That was the point. If the Golf was simply heading home, our paths would separate within moments. Instead, every single turn I made, he made not once, not twice. Every time. The realization spread through the car without anyone needing to say it aloud. He wasn't following the road. He was following us. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God." Another friend leaned forward between the seats, staring through the rear window. He's still there. No one spoke after that. Fear has a strange way of silencing even the loudest people. I kept driving. The roads became narrower, the buildings farther apart. Eventually, the houses disappeared altogether. Ahead, the pavement simply stopped. Dead end. The beam of our headlights illuminated nothing but a wooden fence overlooking black water. My stomach dropped. There was nowhere left to go. I had no choice except to stop, reverse, and turn the car around. Every second felt painfully slow. I shifted into reverse. The steering wheel suddenly felt heavy beneath my hands. The Golf rolled forward. Not fast, not aggressively, almost casually, until it stopped directly in front of us, blocking the only exit. For a single terrifying moment, nobody inside our car breathed. The engine idled quietly. Outside, the village remained completely silent. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. No one spoke. No one moved. His headlights illuminated our faces while ours illuminated his vehicle. It felt less like a traffic encounter, and more like two predators staring at each other across the darkness. Then he edged forward another meter, just enough to make his intentions unmistakably clear. He wasn't trying to pass. He wanted us trapped. Adrenaline exploded through my body. I twisted the steering wheel as far as it would go. The rental car lurched sideways. Its tires scraped the edge of the narrow road. For one terrifying second, I thought we'd hit the ditch. Instead, the front bumper slipped barely past the nose of the Golf. There couldn't have been more than a few inches between the two vehicles. Then suddenly, we were through. I slammed the accelerator. As we shot past his driver's side window, I instinctively looked over. I wish I hadn't. The man never flinched. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture. He didn't even appear angry. He simply watched us. His face looked almost unnaturally still. No expression. No emotion. His pale eyes remained fixed on ours as though he had expected us to escape. The look lasted only a second. It's something about it still unsettles me years later. It wasn't the face of someone caught in an argument. It wasn't road rage. It wasn't frustration. It was the calm, detached expression of someone studying prey. For a brief moment, one of my friends suggested we should stop and confront him. There were 4 of us. Only one of them. Under normal circumstances, the numbers would have been on our side, but these weren't normal circumstances. We were deep inside one of the most remote parts of northern Norway. Out here, firearms weren't unusual. Many locals legally owned rifles and shotguns for hunting. We knew absolutely nothing about the man behind that wheel. Anyone willing to spend nearly an hour pursuing complete strangers through isolated Arctic roads after midnight wasn't behaving rationally. For all we knew, there could have been a loaded hunting rifle lying across his passenger seat. The thought alone ended the discussion. Nobody suggested confronting him again. Escape had become the only objective. One of my friends frantically searched online for the nearest police station while another struggled to find an emergency number. That turned out to be harder than expected. We barely knew where we were. None of us spoke Norwegian. Cell service kept dropping in and out as mountains surrounded the road. Eventually, after several failed attempts, someone finally reached the local police. To our immense relief, the dispatcher answered in fluent English. We spoke over one another, trying to explain what was happening. The operator remained calm. She listened carefully before asking for our location. When we explained where we were, she told us officers could take our statement immediately, but only at the nearest station. The problem was, that station wasn't nearby. It was back in the main town we had passed almost 40 minutes earlier. 40 more minutes. 40 minutes with him behind us. There wasn't another option. I turned the car around and accelerated back toward town. Almost immediately, headlights filled the rearview mirror again. The Golf. Still there. Still following. No matter how fast or slow I drove, he matched us. The next 40 minutes felt impossibly long. Every curve in the road revealed nothing except empty wilderness behind us. Every glance into the mirror showed the same headlights, the same distance, the same silent pursuit. Nobody inside our vehicle even pretended everything was fine anymore. Phones remained in everyone's hands. One friend repeatedly updated the dispatcher. Another kept watching the rear window, as though expecting the Golf to suddenly ram us. Then finally, civilization began returning. Road signs appeared. Streetlights. The first scattered houses on the outskirts of town. Almost immediately, something changed. The Golf slowed. Not dramatically. Just enough to increase the distance between us. Relief swept through the car. Maybe he didn't want to enter town. Maybe he feared being seen. Maybe this nightmare was finally ending. Then I checked the rearview mirror one more time. 2 vehicles had been waiting on a side road. Almost perfectly timed, they pulled out. One merged directly in front of the Golf. The second slipped in behind it. 3 vehicles, moving together, maintaining identical spacing, like a convoy, or worse, a pack. No one inside our car spoke. Nobody had an explanation. Google Maps calmly instructed us to continue toward the police station. Its route led away from the residential streets and deeper into the industrial harbor district. Towering warehouses lined both sides of the road. Shipping containers cast enormous shadows beneath dim security lights. Narrow service roads disappeared between abandoned storage buildings. The streets became emptier with every turn. The silence returned. And for the first time that night, I found myself wondering whether following the GPS had actually made us safer, or whether we had just driven ourselves into the loneliest place in the entire town. The glowing blue dot on Google Maps finally stopped moving. "We're here," someone whispered. Ahead of us stood the local police station, or at least, it was supposed to be. The building sat alone at the edge of the industrial harbor, surrounded by towering warehouses, shipping containers, and rows of silent loading docks. The streets were almost completely deserted, and the wind carried only the distant sound of waves striking the harbor walls. As I slowly turned into the parking lot, I instinctively checked my rearview mirror. The 3 cars were still behind us. For one brief moment, everything froze. Then, almost as if responding to an invisible command, the convoy separated. One vehicle turned left. Another disappeared down a side street. The Golf continued straight before vanishing between rows of warehouses. It was too coordinated to feel accidental. They knew exactly where we had gone. And more importantly, they knew why. Inside our car, nobody spoke. I switched off the engine. Silence immediately swallowed us. We stared toward the station. Every window was dark. No lights. No movement. No patrol cars. Nothing. The place looked abandoned. A horrible thought crossed my mind. What if we had come all this way, only to discover there was nobody here? One of my friends quickly dialed the dispatcher again. The operator answered almost immediately. "Please stay inside your vehicle," she said calmly. "An officer is already on his way." Already on his way. Those words should have reassured us. Instead, they somehow made the wait even more agonizing. 5 minutes is not a long time. Unless you're trapped inside a parked car in the middle of an industrial district after 1 o'clock in the morning, knowing someone has spent nearly an hour following you through the Arctic wilderness Every second stretched endlessly. None of us looked at our phones anymore. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the surrounding streets. Then headlights, far away at first, moving slowly between the warehouses.
One car.
Then another. They weren't approaching directly. They simply circled, disappearing behind buildings, reappearing several streets later, like predators testing the edge of their prey's territory. One of the girls in the back seat quietly began crying. No one tried to comfort her. We were all thinking exactly the same thing. What if the police never arrived? Finally, movement. Not from the road. From behind the station itself, a large figure stepped around the corner carrying a flashlight.
A uniform?
A police officer. I don't think I've ever felt relief hit me as powerfully as it did in that moment. He walked confidently toward our vehicle, his boots echoing across the empty parking lot. At first, his expression suggested he expected another routine complaint, perhaps a traffic dispute, perhaps confused tourists. But as soon as he reached the driver's window, everything changed. He looked inside, saw the fear on our faces, saw the tears, saw 4 exhausted travelers gripping their seats as if expecting someone to attack at any moment. His demeanor softened immediately. Without interrupting us, he listened carefully as we explained everything from the overtaking maneuver to the endless pursuit through deserted roads. When we finished, he nodded slowly. "I'll escort you out of town." Those words finally allowed all of us to breathe again. He explained that he needed to retrieve a police van parked behind the building. He instructed us to pull out first while he followed immediately behind. It sounded simple enough. We thanked him repeatedly before pulling away from the station. The streets remained eerily empty. Streetlights reflected across rain-soaked pavement. Dark loading bays stretched endlessly beside abandoned warehouses. Every side alley looked capable of hiding another vehicle. I found myself checking each intersection before passing it. My knuckles had turned white around the steering wheel. Then I saw headlights behind us. The police van. Its presence alone made the darkness seem less threatening. For the first time that entire night, I genuinely believed everything was over. I was wrong. Without warning, 2 vehicles burst from opposite side streets. One merged ahead of us. The other slipped in behind the police van. Almost simultaneously, the Golf appeared once again. It drove slowly alongside our driver's window. Not speeding. Not trying to ram us. Not honking. Just matching our speed. I turned my head. The driver looked directly at me. His face remained exactly as I remembered it. Cold, emotionless, almost impossibly calm. No anger, no frustration, no expression whatsoever. His eyes met mine without blinking. The stare lasted only seconds, yet it somehow felt much longer. It wasn't the look of someone involved in road rage. It felt personal, as though he wanted to make absolutely certain that I recognized him and understood that he could still find us whenever he chose. The moment he pulled ahead, instinct took over. I slammed both hands against the horn. Again, again, again. The sound echoed across the deserted harbor. At the same time, I hit the brakes as hard as I dared. Surely the officer would understand. Surely he would realize. This was the man. This was the driver. This was the one who had followed us across nearly an hour of empty Arctic roads. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then blue emergency lights exploded into life behind us. The police van accelerated forward and swung sideways across the road, completely blocking the Golf's path. Relief flooded through every person inside our car. The officer stepped out. His door slammed with a heavy metallic crack that echoed through the empty harbor. Jesse was already out of our vehicle before I could stop him. He sprinted toward the police van, desperate to hear what was happening. I waited another minute before following. If something turned violent, this was probably the safest place it could happen. At least now we weren't alone. Walking around the rear of the police van, I finally saw the driver clearly under the streetlights. Nothing about him stood out. That somehow made everything worse. He looked completely ordinary, middle-aged, average height. Nothing unusual about his clothing, nothing memorable about his appearance. Only those eyes, still fixed on me, still carrying that same unnerving emptiness. He spoke quietly with the officer. His accent sounded thick, possibly Russian or somewhere in Eastern Europe. The conversation remained calm, almost disappointingly calm. I waited for the officer to arrest him, to search his car, to demand answers. Instead, the officer stepped aside. The man calmly opened his driver's door, started the engine, and prepared to leave. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The officer later explained the uncomfortable reality. Following another vehicle, however unsettling it might feel, wasn't automatically a criminal offense. He hadn't threatened us. He hadn't collided with us. He hadn't forced us off the road. Everything he had done existed inside a legal gray area. There simply wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. Still, the officer wasn't dismissive. He recorded the driver's information, his vehicle registration, his identity. Before letting us leave, he handed us a direct emergency contact number. If he comes near you again, he said firmly, call immediately. Don't wait. It wasn't the ending we wanted. It was simply the only ending the law could provide. True to his word, the officer escorted us safely beyond the town limits. His van remained behind us until the last streetlights disappeared. Then he stopped. We watched the blue lights shrink into the distance before finally turning back toward town. The moment they vanished, the silence returned. We were alone again, miles from anyone. The Arctic darkness stretched endlessly ahead. Every few seconds I glanced into the mirror. Nothing. No headlights. No golf.
No convoy.
Yet none of us truly relaxed. Fear has a way of lingering long after the danger disappears. Rather than driving directly to our apartment, I parked several streets away. We carried our luggage the remaining distance on foot. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every parked vehicle made us slow down. Only after locking the apartment door behind us, checking it twice, then a third time did anyone finally speak. The strangest part wasn't the man himself. It was the other two cars. Who were they? Friends? Family? Accomplices? Or complete strangers responding to some signal we never understood? Why had they joined him only when we neared town? Why had they separated the instant we entered the police station? Those questions have never been answered. Perhaps they never will be. The rest of our holiday passed without another incident. Lofoten was every bit as breathtaking as people had promised. Towering mountains reflected in still fjords. Tiny fishing villages beneath endless northern skies. Scenes so beautiful they almost seemed unreal. Yet every time I look back at photographs from that trip, another image appears in my mind before the landscapes do. A dark Volkswagen Golf. An expressionless man staring through his windshield. 3 vehicles moving together through empty Arctic roads after midnight. And one unsettling realization that has stayed with me ever since. Sometimes the most terrifying people aren't the ones who attack. They're the ones who follow you just long enough to make you wonder, what would have happened if you had made one different turn?